Hi, I'm Alice Mitchell, and I thought family dinners were meant for connection, for love. But at one dinner, my parents stripped away every bit of dignity I had, handing my own apartment to my sister as if I didn't exist. What I did next stunned them all. It started, as it always did, at the long oak table in my parents' dining room. The table had been in the family for generations, a solid, immovable piece of furniture that had witnessed countless holidays, arguments, and forced smiles. Tonight, it was set for Sunday dinner. The smell of my mother's roast chicken, usually a scent of comfort and home, felt heavy and suffocating in the air. The low hum of conversation was a familiar rhythm. My father, Robert, holding court at one end. My mother, Helen, refilling glasses, and my sister, Sophia, soaking in the attention like a flower turning toward the sun. I sat quietly, picking at a loose thread on my napkin. I had learned long ago that my role at these gatherings was to be an observer, a quiet fixture who laughed at the right moments and passed the mashed potatoes when asked. My contributions to the conversation were often overlooked. My stories cut short to make way for one of Sophia's more dramatic anecdotes. It was a dynamic I had accepted, or at least learned to endure. My father cleared his throat, a loud, theatrical sound that silenced the table. He had a way of commanding attention, of making even the most trivial announcement feel like a royal decree. He placed his fork and knife down with a deliberate clatter, folded his hands, and looked around the table, his eyes skipping right over me. "We have something wonderful to share," he began, a broad, self-satisfied smile spreading across his face. My mother beamed beside him, looking at Sophia with a pride that was almost blinding. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. These announcements were never about me. "As you all know," my father continued, his voice booming in the suddenly quiet room, "Sophia has been working so hard to find her footing." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Sophia's hard work consisted of a series of short-lived jobs she'd quit because they were unfulfilling. Funded by what my parents called loans, but everyone knew were gifts. And we've decided it's time she had a stable place to call her own. A foundation to build from. He paused for dramatic effect, his gaze landing on my mother, then Sophia, then back to the center of the table. "So, we've made a decision. From next month, Sophia will move into Alice's apartment. It just makes sense." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. Alice's apartment. He said it so casually, as if he were talking about a spare room in their own house, a storage unit filled with forgotten junk. Not my home, not the place I had poured every ounce of my sweat, my savings, and my soul into. Silence hung in the air for a half-second before it was broken by a ripple of approval. My aunt nodded sagely. "Oh, that's a wonderful solution," my uncle chimed in. "Great idea, Robert. Keep it in the family." Everyone nodded. Everyone agreed. Everyone except me. I sat there, pinned to my chair by the weight of their collective decision. A decision made about my life, in front of me, without me. The world seemed to slow down, the clinking of silverware against porcelain echoing in my ears like distant bells. I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare where I was the only one who knew we were asleep. My voice was gone, lost somewhere in the hollow space that had just opened up in my chest. I looked at my family, at their smiling, nodding faces, and I had never felt so completely and utterly alone. My sister, Sophia, smirked across the table. It wasn't a subtle expression. It was a triumphant, knowing look that communicated everything she felt in that moment. Power, victory. She had always been good at winning, mostly because the game had always been rigged in her favor. She twirled her fork in her pasta, the picture of nonchalant grace, as if my entire life hadn't just been upended for her convenience. "It'll be so nice to have a place of my own, finally," she said, her voice dripping with a practiced innocence that made my skin crawl. The word finally was a performance, designed to paint her as a long-suffering daughter who was at last getting her due. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Her words were for the audience, for our parents and relatives who were already applauding her next chapter. My role was simply to provide the stage. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that started in my chest and spread up my neck to my face. I could feel their eyes on me now, not with concern, but with expectation. They were waiting for me to nod along, to smile and congratulate my sister, to play my part as the supportive, ever-giving older sibling. They expected me to be grateful for the opportunity to provide for Sophia. My silence was an inconvenience, a brief, awkward pause in their perfectly planned evening. No one asked for my opinion. No one asked if I was okay with it. My mother's smile was the worst part. It was wide and genuine, filled with a radiant joy that was directed entirely at Sophia. That smile, which had so rarely been turned my way with such unadulterated pride, felt like another knife twisting in my gut. It told me everything I needed to know. My feelings were irrelevant. My home was not my own. My life was a resource to be allocated as my parents saw fit. I tried to speak. I opened my mouth, but the words were stuck, tangled in a knot of shock and rage in my throat. What could I even say? Excuse me, but that's my apartment, the one I pay the mortgage on every month? The thought was so absurdly logical that it sounded insane in the context of this dinner. The reality of my ownership, of my name on the deed and the bank statements, felt like a foreign concept in this room where parental authority was absolute. Laughter carried on around me. My uncle started telling a joke, and the conversation drifted away. The matter was settled. My eviction had been a footnote, a minor administrative detail in the grand narrative of Sophia's life. I sat there, a ghost at the feast, my plate of food growing cold in front of me. I watched my sister laugh, her head thrown back, a princess in her castle, and I felt a cold, hard certainty settle in my bones. They did not see me. They did not know me. And they had no idea what they had just done. The public humiliation wasn't just in their words. It was in their complete and utter disregard for my existence. It was in the casual way they had erased me from my own life story. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of disembodied sounds and movements. I moved food around my plate, feigning an appetite I didn't have. I listened to the rise and fall of conversations about topics that suddenly felt trivial. A neighbor's new car, a politician on the news, plans for the upcoming holidays. Each word, each laugh felt like a shovelful of dirt being thrown onto the coffin of my autonomy. I was present in body, but my mind was miles away, replaying my father's announcement over and over again, each repetition chipping away another piece of my composure. I felt a desperate need to defend myself, to lay out the facts as if I were in a courtroom. I wanted to list my overtime hours, the weekends I'd spent working instead of with friends, the careful budgeting that had allowed me to save for a down payment. I wanted to talk about the fear and excitement of signing the mortgage papers, the pride of turning the key in the lock for the first time. That apartment wasn't just a collection of rooms. It was a symbol of my independence, a physical manifestation of my hard work and sacrifice. It was the one place on earth that was truly mine, a sanctuary from a world that had always made me feel like I was taking up too much space. But I knew with a crushing certainty that none of it would matter. My facts were irrelevant. My feelings were inconvenient. In their eyes, my success was not my own. It was a family asset to be redistributed as needed. My independence was a temporary loan, and now the loan was being called in. Sophia needed it more. That was the unspoken, unassailable logic that governed our family. I watched Sophia as she described her plans for the apartment. She spoke of painting the walls a soft sage green, of buying a new velvet sofa for the living room, of turning the spare bedroom into a yoga space. She spoke with the authority of an owner, her voice full of excitement and entitlement. My mother listened with rapt attention, offering suggestions and encouragement. "Oh, that sounds lovely, dear," she'd say. "Your father and I can help you with the painting." There was no malice in my mother's voice, and that somehow made it worse. It wasn't a conscious cruelty. It was a thoughtless one. She genuinely did not see anything wrong with what was happening. In her mind, she was simply facilitating a solution for her struggling younger daughter using a resource that was readily available. The fact that the resource was a person with rights and feelings did not seem to bent her the equation. The air in the room grew thicker, the cheerful atmosphere pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. I had to get out. I mumbled an excuse about an early morning meeting, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. My mother nodded absently, her attention already returning to Sophia. "Drive safe, Alice," she said, her voice distant. As I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, A brief silence fell over the table. For a moment, every eye was on me. I saw a flicker of something in my father's expression, not guilt, but perhaps a hint of annoyance, as if my leaving was a breach of protocol. He expected me to stay, to listen, to accept. My departure was a small act of defiance, and it was not welcome. Sophia looked at me then, her smirk softening into a look of pity. "Don't be upset, Alice," she said, her tone condescendingly sweet. "I'll let you visit any time." The sheer audacity of her words sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated rage through me. It was so potent, it almost made me dizzy. Visit? Visit my own home? I didn't trust myself to speak. I just gave a tight, jerky nod and turned away, walking out of the dining room with as much dignity as I could muster. As I gathered my coat and purse from the hallway, I could hear the conversation resuming behind me, my absence already forgotten. I closed the front door behind me, the click of the latch sounding unnervingly final. Standing on the porch in the cool night air, I finally allowed myself to breathe, but the breath came out as a ragged, silent sob, the first crack in a dam that was about to break. This wasn't a new feeling. This public dismissal, this sense of being fundamentally less important, was the wallpaper of my childhood. I had worked tirelessly to build a life where I could finally escape it, to create a space where my worth wasn't up for debate. But as I stood there on my parents' front porch, I realized I had only built a prettier cage. The locks were still on the outside, and my family held all the keys. Growing up, my world was a constant balancing act with my sister Sophia on one side of the scale and me on the other. The scale was never level. Sophia was the golden child, the one whose every minor achievement was celebrated with the fanfare of a national holiday. Her first steps, her first words, her finger paintings, they were all carefully documented in photo albums and shared with breathless pride at every family gathering. She was bright, bubbly, and effortlessly charming, a magnet for affection and approval. I was the quiet one, the afterthought. My accomplishments were met with a distracted, "That's nice, dear," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Sophia. When Sophia won a ribbon in a school art show, my parents framed it and hung it in the living room. When I won the district-wide science fair, my certificate was tucked into a drawer and forgotten. The message was clear and consistent. Sophia was the star, and I was the stagehand, there to ensure the lighting was right and the props were in place. My parents never acknowledged my sacrifices because, to them, they weren't sacrifices at all. They were my duty. When I was in high school, I worked a part-time job at a local bookstore to save for a used car. I spent my weekends shelving books and cleaning floors while Sophia was at the mall with her friends, spending the allowance she received for doing nothing. When I finally bought my little hatchback, a dented but reliable machine, my father inspected it with a critical eye. "It's practical, I suppose," was all he said. 6 months later, when Sophia turned 16, they bought her a brand new convertible. When she crashed it within a year, they sighed, called her reckless, with a tone of fond exasperation, and bought her another one. Her mistakes were treated as charming quirks, evidence of a vivacious spirit. My mistakes, on the other hand, were treated as character flaws. The pattern continued into adulthood. I put myself through college with a combination of scholarships, student loans, and grueling work-study jobs. I lived in a tiny dorm room and subsisted on ramen noodles, meticulously budgeting every dollar. Sophia attended a private university, her tuition and lavish apartment paid for by my parents. She changed her major 3 times, each switch accompanied by a dramatic declaration that she had finally found her true passion. Her passions never lasted, but the funding never ran out. After graduation, I moved into a shared apartment with 3 other people and started at the bottom of the corporate ladder. I worked overtime, took on extra projects, and slowly, painstakingly built a career. Buying my own apartment wasn't just a financial goal. It was a declaration of independence. It was proof that I could build something solid and lasting, something that no one could take away from me. Or so I thought. The day I closed on the apartment was one of the proudest moments of my life. I called my parents, my voice trembling with excitement to tell them the news. "Oh, that's great, honey," my mother said, her voice distracted. "Listen, I have to run. Sophia's having another crisis with her landlord." The conversation was over in less than a minute. My monumental achievement was reduced to a piece of inconveniently timed news. Meanwhile, Sophia's life was a series of self-inflicted dramas that my parents were always eager to solve. There were maxed-out credit cards, which they quietly paid off. There was a business idea short-lived Etsy shop selling jewelry she'd bought wholesale that they funded with thousands of dollars. When it failed, they blamed the economy, the platform, everything but Sophia's lack of effort. Her failures were always externalized, her successes, however small, entirely her own. My successes were minimized, and my struggles were my own fault, a consequence of not being as naturally gifted as my sister. This dynamic, this constant draining process of being undermined, had shaped me in ways I was only beginning to understand. It had made me relentlessly self-reliant because I knew I could never count on anyone else for support, but it had also instilled in me a deep, quiet anger, a resentment that simmered just beneath the surface. I had swallowed my pride so many times that I was choking on it. At the dinner table, watching Sophia plan the redecoration of my home, all those years of quiet humiliation came rushing back. I remembered every dismissive comment, every overlooked achievement, every time I had been made to feel small so that she could feel big. This wasn't just about an apartment. It was about my entire life. It was about the fundamental belief my family held that I was a secondary character in their story. They had given Sophia everything. And now, when she wanted the one thing that was mine, they expected me to hand it over with a smile. They had pushed me and pushed me, assuming I would bend as I always had. They never imagined that this time, I might finally break, and they had no idea that when I did, I wouldn't be the only one to get hurt. The drive home was a silent 20-minute scream. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, the smooth leather a stark contrast to the jagged chaos in my mind. The city lights blurred into long, meaningless streaks of red and gold. The radio was off, the silence in the car a hollow container for my rage. I replayed the scene at the dinner table again and again, each time feeling the same wave of disbelief and fury. My father's voice, my mother's smile, Sophia's smirk. It was a nightmare on a loop. My own parents, the two people who were supposed to be my staunchest defenders, my unwavering support system, had just publicly stripped me of my home and my dignity. They had discussed and decided the fate of my life's biggest accomplishment as if it were a trivial matter, like choosing a restaurant for dinner. The audacity of it was staggering. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was a fundamental denial of my personhood. They didn't see me as an adult, as an independent woman who had built her own life. They saw me as an extension of themselves, a resource to be managed and deployed for the family's benefit, which always meant Sophia's benefit. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. I glanced at the screen, my heart pounding with a toxic mix of hope and dread. Maybe she was apologizing. Maybe she had realized the gravity of what they had done. The message read, "Hope you're not too upset, sweetheart. You know, we're only doing this because Sophia needs a fresh start." Sweetheart. The word was a drop of poison. It was the term she used to soften a blow, to manage my feelings, to dismiss my anger before it could even be voiced. I didn't reply. My fingers were trembling too much to type. A few minutes later, another buzz. "It's already decided, Alice. Please don't make this difficult." The audacity of that message sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through me. Don't make it difficult. I was the one being made homeless, and I was the one being told not to make things difficult. The implication was clear. My role was to absorb this injustice quietly, to facilitate my own erasure with grace and compliance. My pain was an obstacle to their plan, an inconvenience to be smoothed over. I pulled the car over, my breathing ragged. I couldn't drive like this. I was shaking, a deep, visceral tremor that started in my core and radiated out to my limbs. I felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of their expectations. For my entire life, I had been the easy one, the responsible one, the one who never caused trouble. I had built my life on a foundation of being accommodating, of swallowing my own needs to keep the peace. I had always believed that if I worked hard enough, if I was successful enough, they would finally see me. They would finally respect me. But I was wrong. My success hadn't earned me their respect. It had only made me a more valuable resource to plunder. They saw my apartment not as a testament to my hard work, but as a convenient, ready-made solution to Sophia's latest bout of instability. My strength was not something to be admired, it was something to be exploited. Another buzz. This time it was from Sophia. "Hey, can you send me the paint colors you used in the living room? Mom thinks a light gray would be better, but I'm not sure." I stared at the message, my vision blurring with tears of pure, unadulterated rage. She was already picking out paint colors. She was discussing the decor of my apartment with my mother, as if my consent was a foregone conclusion. She wasn't even asking for permission. She was simply moving forward with the plan, confident in the knowledge that her desires would always take precedence over my rights. That text message was the final straw. It was the spark that ignited the dry tinder of years of resentment. That moment, something inside me snapped. The part of me that had always sought their approval, that had always prioritized family harmony above all else, died a quiet death on the side of that dark road. I gripped the steering wheel, the texts glowing on the screen in front of me, and I realized a profound and terrifying truth. No one in my family saw me. Not really. They saw a daughter, a sister, a role I was meant to play. They saw a safety net, a solution, a stepping stone for Sophia. But they did not see Alice. They did not see the woman who had fought and clawed her way to a life of her own. And if they couldn't see me, then they couldn't hurt me. Not anymore. I took a deep, shuddering breath and put the car in drive. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not be making this easy for them. I would not go quietly. That night, I sat on my couch, the one I had spent months saving for, and stared at the four walls that surrounded me. This was my sanctuary. The air inside was still and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. Every object in the room was a testament to my journey. The worn armchair in the corner, a flea market find I had reupholstered myself. The bookshelf overflowing with books I had collected since I was a teenager. The framed art on the walls, prints from local artists I had bought to support my community. This was more than an apartment. It was a curated collection of my life, my tastes, my struggles, and my triumphs. And they were going to give it to Sophia. The thought was so monstrous, so fundamentally unjust, that it was hard to comprehend. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. What could I do? I could scream and yell, but they would just call me dramatic and selfish. I could refuse, but they would deploy every emotional manipulation tactic in their arsenal. Guilt, shame, appeals to family loyalty. They would wear me down until I conceded just to make it stop. They had been doing it my whole life. But then my eyes landed on a simple black frame hanging on the wall by my desk. It wasn't art. It wasn't a photograph. It was a copy of my mortgage agreement. I had framed it as a reminder, a private symbol of my biggest achievement. I got up from the couch and walked over to it, my fingers tracing the glass over the bold, official text. My name was there, printed in clear, undeniable letters. Alice Mitchell. Beneath it, my signature. Nowhere on that document was my father's name, or my mother's, or Sophia's. It was mine. The debt was mine. The ownership was mine. I took the frame off the wall and carried it back to the couch, holding it in my lap like a shield. I read through the legal jargon, the words that had once seemed so intimidating, now a source of profound comfort. This was a contract, a binding legal document that a family dinner conversation could not undo. They could make announcements, they could make plans, they could make demands, but they could not change the fact that this property, this space, belonged to me and me alone. A new feeling began to push through the despair and the rage. It was a cold, quiet resolve. The shaking in my hands stopped. The frantic, circular thoughts in my mind began to slow and straighten, aligning into a single, clear path. For years, I had played their game by their rules. I had tried to win their love and respect through achievement and compliance. I had hoped that one day they would finally see my worth. But that was a fool's game. The rules were designed so I could never win. The only way to win was not to play. I whispered the words to myself, the sound barely audible in the quiet room. No one decides this but me. It was a revelation, a simple, powerful truth that had been buried under years of conditioning. My whole life, I had been waiting for their permission. Permission to be proud of myself. Permission to be angry. Permission to exist. And now, I was finally giving that permission to myself. I would not fight them on their terms. I would not engage in a screaming match or a tearful confrontation. That was what they expected. That was a battle I would lose because they would frame it as me being emotional and ungrateful. Instead, I would use the tools I had earned for myself, my intelligence, my resourcefulness, and my legal ownership of this apartment. The anger was still there, a hot coal glowing in my chest. But it was no longer a wild, uncontrolled fire. It was a forge. And in that forge, a plan was beginning to take shape. A quiet, simple, and devastatingly effective plan. They thought they had all the power. They thought my silence was weakness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I would not be a victim in my own home. I would be a landlord. And my family was about to face an eviction notice they never saw coming. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The rage and despair from the night before had cooled into a steely determination. I didn't reach for my phone to check for more manipulative texts. I didn't dwell on the injustice of it all. Instead, I made a pot of coffee and sat down at my desk with my laptop. It was time to stop reacting and start acting. For the past few months, I had been quietly exploring the idea of renting out my spare bedroom. It wasn't out of financial necessity, but more as a way to build another stream of income, another layer of independence. I had done my research, spoken to a rental agency, and even had professional photos taken of the space. It was a back-burner project, a someday plan. But that Sunday night, someday had become right now. My plan was simple. I wasn't just going to rent out the spare room. I was going to rent out the entire apartment. Not to Sophia, not to anyone in my family. I was going to find a tenant, a complete stranger, and sign a legally binding lease. My family wanted to treat my home like a piece of communal property, so I would respond with the one thing they couldn't argue with: a contract. I pulled up the contact information for the rental agent I had spoken with, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Evans. My hands were steady as I dialed her number. "Miss Evans, it's Alice Mitchell," I said when she answered, my voice even and calm. "We spoke a few weeks ago about my apartment downtown. I'm ready to move forward with listing it for rent." "Alice, great to hear from you," she said, her voice businesslike and efficient. "Are we still thinking of just the spare room, or has something changed?" "Something has changed," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "I want to list the entire two-bedroom unit, and I need to do it fast. I'm looking for a tenant to move in by the 1st of next month." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "That's a tight timeline, but the market is hot right now. It's doable. Is everything all right?" For a second, I was tempted to unload the whole sordid story, but I resisted. This wasn't about drama or sympathy. This was a business transaction. Everything's fine. I lied smoothly. "I've had a sudden change of plans. I'll be moving into a smaller place and want to get a tenant into my current apartment as soon as possible." "Understood," Miss Evans said, all business. "I have a few potential candidates on my list who are looking for a place just like yours. Corporate relocations, young professionals. They're pre-screened and ready to go. I can start showing the apartment this week." "Perfect," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. This was real. This was happening. Send me the paperwork. I want everything to be official and by the book. Over the next few days, I became a master of deception. I ignored the increasingly frantic texts and calls from my mother and Sophia. When my father called, I let it go to voicemail. I needed to create a space of silence to execute my plan without their interference. Meanwhile, I was in constant communication with Miss Evans. She sent over the profiles of 3 potential tenants. I reviewed them carefully, not just for their financial stability, but for their character. I didn't want any drama. I wanted someone quiet, stable, and professional. I settled on a man named David, a 35-year-old software engineer who was relocating for a job at a major tech company. His references were impeccable, his credit score was perfect, and in his bio, he mentioned that he was looking for a quiet, long-term rental. He was the perfect candidate. Miss Evans arranged a virtual tour, and I walked him through the apartment on a video call, pointing out the features with a strange sense of detachment. It felt like I was selling someone else's home. David was polite and impressed. He loved the natural light and the view of the city. He asked smart questions about the building's amenities and the neighborhood. By the end of the call, he was ready to sign. The next day, Miss Evans sent over the lease agreement. I read every line, every clause, before signing my name on the line marked landlord. I scanned the signed document and sent it back to her. It was done. I had a legally contracted tenant moving into my apartment in less than 2 weeks. I now had a legal and financial obligation to a complete stranger, an obligation that superseded my family's entitled demands. The final piece of my plan was the most difficult. I had to break my silence. I had to lure them to the apartment for the final reveal. I took a deep breath and composed a text message to my mother, the words carefully chosen to play into their narrative. "Hi, Mom. I'm sorry for being quiet. You're right, it was a lot to take in. I've had some time to think, and I'm ready to help with the transition. Can you, Dad, and Sophia come over on Saturday morning to start moving some of her things in?" I hit send, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a lie, a calculated and manipulative act. But they had taught me the art of manipulation through years of practice. I was simply using their own tactics against them. My mother's reply came back almost instantly. "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you're being sensible about this. Of course we'll be there, Tenna. And we're so proud of you for putting family first." I read her words, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt nothing at all. The emotional hold they had on me was gone, severed by the cold, hard lines of a legally binding contract. They thought I was surrendering. They thought they had won. They had no idea they were walking into a trap, one that I had set with a quiet, steady hand. The week leading up to Saturday was a masterclass in quiet deception. I played the part of the dutiful daughter, exchanging polite, non-committal texts with my mother about the logistics of the move. She asked about closet space and whether the building had a service elevator. I answered each question with a calm, even tone, my fingers typing out lies while my mind rehearsed the final scene. Sophia sent me pictures of throw pillows and area rugs, asking for my opinion. "They look great," I'd text back, a hollow feeling in my stomach. Internally, I was a bundle of nerves. A part of me was terrified. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my family, and I had no idea what the fallout would be. But another, stronger part of me knew this was necessary. It was a desperate act of self-preservation. They had backed me into a corner, and this was the only way out. The day before the big reveal, David, my new tenant, moved in. I had arranged for a moving company to handle everything, and I met him at the apartment to hand over the keys. He was just as he had seemed online, polite, professional, and genuinely excited about his new home. "It's a beautiful place," he said, looking around the living room, which was now filled with his neatly stacked boxes. "Thank you for making this process so smooth, Alice. You've been a great landlord already." Landlord. The word sounded strange and powerful. It was a role I had never intended to play, but it fit me surprisingly well. It was a role defined by rules, responsibilities, and most importantly, authority. "I'm glad you like it," I said, managing a small smile. "I've left a list of building info and local recommendations on the counter for you. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call." As I left the apartment, turning my own key in the lock for the last time, a wave of sadness hit me. This place had been my sanctuary, and I was giving it up. But the sadness was quickly replaced by a sense of purpose. I was sacrificing the space to save myself. Saturday morning arrived, a bright, sunny day that felt mockingly cheerful. I stood across the street from my apartment building, sipping a coffee from a nearby cafe, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had told my family I would meet them there, another small lie in a web of them. I needed to see them arrive. I needed to watch the scene unfold from a safe distance. At exactly 10 a.m., my father's oversized SUV pulled up to the curb. My mother got out of the passenger side, a beaming smile on her face. Then my father came around to the back and opened the trunk, which was packed with Sophia's boxes and suitcases. Finally, Sophia herself emerged. She strutted towards the building's entrance, not like a guest, but like an owner, a queen arriving at her new palace. She held a small decorative box in her hands, probably filled with some of her jewelry or trinkets, ready to claim her new domain. They buzzed the apartment, and I held my breath. I had coached David on what to do. Just be polite, I had told him. Introduce yourself and tell them you're the new tenant. That's it. From my vantage point, I couldn't see the door, but I could imagine the scene perfectly. My family, expecting me to open the door with a resigned smile, instead being greeted by a complete stranger, a tall, confident man in business casual attire. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then the front door of the building swung open again. My family stumbled out, their faces a mask of confusion and disbelief. Sophia looked like she had seen a ghost. My mother was pale, her hand clutching my father's arm. My father's face was red, a storm of anger brewing in his eyes. They stood on the sidewalk, looking up at my apartment window, then back at each other. They were speechless, powerless. For the first time in my life, I had taken away their control. I had rewritten the ending to their story. I took one last sip of my coffee, dropped the cup in a nearby trash can, and walked away, the sun warm on my back. I didn't look back. The shockwave hit them exactly as I knew it would. As they stood on the sidewalk, utterly bewildered, my father finally found his voice. He pulled out his phone, and a moment later, mine began to ring. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I silenced it. Then the text started, a furious barrage of questions and demands. What is going on, Alice? Who is this man in your apartment? Call me right now. I read them with a calm detachment as I walked to the small studio apartment I had rented for myself. A temporary refuge for the next phase of my life. The power had shifted. They were no longer in control of the narrative, and they couldn't stand it. Later that afternoon, after a dozen more missed calls, I sent a single simple text to a group chat with my parents and Sophia. It was a PDF attachment. The file was named Lease Agreement PDF. That was when the real explosion happened. My mother called, and this time I answered, putting the phone on speaker and placing it on the table in front of me. Alice, what is the meaning of this? She shrieked, her voice shrill with panic and fury. You signed a lease? You rented out your apartment without telling us. It's my apartment, Mom, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I don't need your permission to rent it out. But what about Sophia? She cried. We promised her. She has all her things in the car. We told her she could move in. You made a promise you had no right to make, I said, the words coming easily now. You tried to give away something that didn't belong to you. This is the consequence of that. My father got on the phone then, his voice a low growl. You have embarrassed this family, Alice. You have humiliated your sister. This little stunt of yours is selfish and cruel. Humiliated? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. You want to talk about humiliation? You announced to our entire family that you were giving my home away without even speaking to me first. You treated me like I was nothing, like my life and my hard work were meaningless. You don't get to lecture me on cruelty. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had never spoken to them like this before. The quiet, compliant Alice was gone. Sophia started sobbing in the background, a theatrical wailing sound. I can't believe you would do this to me, she cried. I hate you. The words should have hurt, but they didn't. They were just empty noise. Her hatred was meaningless to me now. Her opinion was irrelevant. I calmly pulled the lease from my folder and placed it in his hands. This is mine, my choice, my responsibility. And it's not up for discussion, Sophia sputtered in rage, but there was nothing to argue. That evening, I sat alone in my new, small apartment. It was mostly empty, just a mattress on the floor and a few boxes. But it was mine. The silence was a balm, a welcome relief after a lifetime of noise. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply looked at my parents and said, You taught me independence was worthless, but today you'll see it's everything. Then I walked away, leaving them standing speechless in the hallway. The fallout was immense. My family treated me like a traitor. My aunts and uncles called to tell me I had broken my mother's heart. But for the first time, their opinions didn't penetrate the armor I had built around myself. Their version of family was a one-way street, and I was no longer willing to travel it. I had lost my family, or at least the illusion of the family I thought I had, but I had gained something far more valuable, myself. I had found my voice, my strength, and my absolute, unshakable right to own my own life. And that was a home that